us today. My name is Marce, I'm the public program producer here. And today's event, Networks of Pride, is a panel discussion curated in collaboration with my colleague Ritika Viswas and Dr Hannah Robbins, who is the director of the Black Studies at the University of Nottingham. Today's discussion is focused on creativity and queerness, and we have 4 fantastic panelists joining us today. Hannah, who is going to chair the panel, will also introduce our guests very shortly. First, I want to give a few housekeeping notes. While delivering content online, NAE strives to create safe and secure environments where guests, staff, audience, and audience can work together confidently and in mutual respect. Please refer to the guidelines for engaging in online events that were sent to you with the link to this event. Please remember that this event is being recorded and it may be shared online. If you want to ask any questions for the panel, please use the chat feature on YouTube. And if there are a lot of questions, the chair will curate them for the panel, so sorry we can't get to all of you. And of course, feel free to talk to one another using the chat as well. So the work that we do means a lot to us, and we'd love to hear from you as well. Just before the end of the event, we will share a link to an online survey in the chat. If you can please take a few minutes to complete that survey, it would really help us continue to improve the work that we do. Now, without further ado, welcome Hannah Robbins.
To Networks of Pride. Sorry about technical delays. Hopefully this will run fairly smoothly, but bear with us. We are obviously all operating in the same circumstances. This event is created in collaboration with NAE and the Centre for Black Studies at the University of Nottingham, where we're trying to create a safe and community-minded approach to thinking about Black lives and the research that we do as academics as well. But that's not what today is about. Today is about celebrating Black lives in the context of LGBT History Month. And I'm really excited to welcome our 4 panelists to speak on their creative practice and how that intersects with us as individuals as well. So I'm delighted that we have Campbell X, we have Candice, we have AJ, and we have Paula with us. And what's going to happen, format for you, is I'm going to begin with asking each speaker a question, which is, what is queer Black joy to you? And they're going to speak for a period of time between sort of 3 to 5 minutes on their own sort of attitude to that question. And then we're going to go into a conversation together and respond to the questions in the chat. So to begin, I'm going to move to Campbell, who is a writer and director. Their film Stud Life still exists, a queer urban rom-com, and it was voted as one of The Guardian's top 10 Black British films ever. He was one of the contributors to the Royal Court Theatre series, My White Best Friend, and we are so excited to have him here. So Campbell, what is queer Black joy to you?
A lot of times we are forced to think about Black trauma. And thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. Welcome, everybody. To me, queer Black joy is about being able to live our authentic lives. And when I say that, to integrate our Blackness and our queerness without fear of harm, and, having community around us that affirms who we are as queer Black people. So for me personally as well, is about centering my Blackness in spirituality and knowledge about where I've come from, the history of my people beyond colonization and slavery, because I think a lot of times we tend to focus on that, and rather than the teachings that could have come down through our bodies that we remember intrinsically. So for me, that's joyful, and us loving each other. I don't mean just romantically, but in our work and our friendship, as well as our romantic relationships, that we center Blackness and Black love. So to me, that's queer Black joy.
Beautiful. There's a round of applause from back of the screen. I don't know that the rest of the world can see it, but
so lovely.
I love this concept of sort of affirmation and community, but also spirituality and also ancestral connection. I think we all have such different ways of sort of existing, particularly as people living in Britain and in Europe at the moment. So I think that that's sort of a really sort of resonant and important place to start. Next, we are moving to Candice, who you might also know as OK Candice on their socials. Candice is a writer, a poet, an artist, and a creative producer working between the UK and Germany. Their text, performance, and film work has been shown in many venues in Berlin and in London. She is currently an artist curator at Eastside Projects and a member of the Black Curators Collective. So I'm going to put the same question to you. What for you is queer Black joy? Oh, we can't hear you. Okay, Candice is going to come in and out. So what I'm going to do is move on to AJ, and then we'll come back. So AJ, let's introduce you. So AJ is an artist and a writer whose current work centers the healing nature of self-love and its potential to facilitate growth and joy. What a beautiful sentiment. They are the founder of Beat the Gods. I had an amazing conversation with one of our friends about saying that properly, which was really amazing. So I'd love to hear more about this project, which is a collaborative space for Black, non-binary and trans femme people about reimagining how makeup is used to express self, creativity, and nurture individual and collective safety. So let's go to AJ. What is queer Black joy to you?
I've prepared a little something that I'll read out. Maybe it's a trick of the light that draws out all the shadows. The sun not giving any warmth, the cold not even a smidge made mellow. But then, as the sharp sting hits the secret chord of I, warmth catches me securely as I surrender to myself. The self that holds compassion for myself, for me, we can feel abundantly, and then we rest.
That was beautiful. I think we have lost AJ, but I love this.
Black queer child.
We lost you. I think we
Black queer child. Feel the vibrant energy flowing around you.
Are you there, AJ?
Good.
Yes, we are. We lost you, I think, about 10 lines into the
Yeah,
first
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. I just wanted to pull out this line that is so beautiful, which is the warmth captures me securely. This idea of sort of being protected and that being part of the manifestation of ourselves, such a key way of looking at how we sort of exist and thrive. Crucially, I think Campbell really picked up on this emphasis on trauma and sort of historical identities framed in negative and painful context. And actually, one of the things that we really seek out in sharing our space is this idea of being held and being present. What I'm going to do is move to Paula, and then we'll sort of jump background. This is like being in a normal conversation where we all get distracted by things. So Paula, I'm thrilled to welcome you. Let's introduce you properly. Paula is a journalist, historian, and public speaker. Her work focuses on Blackness, queerness, and social politics in publications of all sorts, but including Vogue, The Independent, Vice magazine, Stylist, time out. She's currently studying for an MA in Black British History at Goldsmiths in London, and her research explores the lives and activism of Black British lesbians and queer women in the 1970s and 80s. So what a diverse and amazing profile. Paula, what is queer Black joy to you?
Well, thank you so much for having us and putting this talk together, Hannah. I love the concept, so I'm really glad to be here. So this is a good question, and ruminating on it, I think that we find joy in all forms. I think that we excavate joy through our practice, whatever that may be, hoping to create spaces and experiences that can elicit joy in others, whilst also at the same time living out our lives in the margins. With my academic research, for example, which focuses on historicising Black British lesbian world building, I'm hoping to facilitate joy for Black British young queer people who are starved of their history, as well as joy for Black queer elders who have long been maligned, with little public record of, how they loved and how they socialized, how they built families and more. With my travel guide, so I started an initiative called the Black Queer Travel Guide, and part of it is an app that I'm building to try and help us just be able to travel a bit more safely or contribute to that sphere and find local Black communities, local Black queer communities. I'm hoping to facilitate joy for Black queer travellers who have felt like so much of the world has been off limits to them, and joy for Black queer locals who will be, shaping the direction of this, so that it's not just Westerners ultimately subsuming and bastardizing their lives and cultures. But furthermore, I think finding joy beyond what these are, which is ultimately labours of love, which is what all of us are doing. All of our projects are a labour of love in some way. To find joy beyond that, I think requires a lot of intentionality. And I think it requires us to tap into a mode that moves beyond our lauded resilience and creativity and the work that we create. And I think that it's quite complicated at times, but it does mean also prioritising yourself and your well-being and your peace. And for me, I think as a Black queer person, I find joy in seeking out spaces with other Black queer people where I'm allowed to be myself and I'm allowed to be whole. And embracing this joy, I think, means knowing when to step back from all that you do to be able to engage in an effort of self-preservation. And I feel it a lot, is that there's a guilt that arises when you just pause, when you take a beat, when you just take a second, because you're all too aware that, you're working towards something, you're working towards a future, you're working towards a mode of liberation that is much bigger than you. But I think in that excavation of our
I think we've just lost Paula, but I'm just going to pick out a couple of the themes that were covered there. Back.
Yeah, it's terrible. So I'm sorry that everyone had to see that. But essentially what I was just saying that, we know that this work is draining and it's never ending, and we're never going to see a completion in our lifetimes realistically. But ultimately, we need to be able to lean into that joy. And I hope that that's something that we're all working on in our various ways. That's it.
Beautiful, thank you. Again, snaps around the chat. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of themes there, and then we'll see if we can get audio from Candice. And I was just thinking about sort of connections between the sections of what you were saying. That rhymed. I hate it when I do that. The idea of world building and intentionality, but also connection between generations. I think that's something that we don't so frequently see in representations of Black British queerness, is that there's sort of pockets of our communities, but we don't often see those interconnections, how different parts of our environment inform who we are. So I thought it was a really beautiful sentiment. I'm going to try coming to Candice. How are we doing?
I'm not sure. How am I doing? Can I be heard?
Beautiful.
Praise be to the Most High. Okay. So very quickly then. So thank you for everyone who spoke before, and thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. When I think of Black queer joy, I'm reminded of a quote by one of my favorite writers and poets, Pat Parker. And she says, with every touch of you, I am fresh bread, warm and rising. And when I think of Black queer joy, I'm very much reminded of community. I'm very much reminded of my ability, if not duty, to grow and to continue to develop myself in the eyesight and the comfort in the community of my peers. And for me, it should always for me, Black queer joy is about leading with intention, first and foremost. That I walk into spaces knowing who I am, and if I don't know who I am, feeling comfort in that I don't know, that limbo space, and doing my best to comfort those around me, but also to find strength in the discomfort and knowing that it's a communal effort. So for me, yeah, it's about staying warm, staying true, leading with intention, leading with love, and taking accountability when you don't lead up to those things. That's it, really. I'm just worried about my sound now, so I'm gonna stay stum.
That came across beautifully. The audio was delightful, so don't worry about it. It was crystal clear. I love this sort of idea of developing comfort in the fluidity and sort of, I guess, liminal spaces. Like there is a sort of quest to define ourselves so often, to turn up with our labels and present them to everyone. This is who I am, and for them to then be able to latch onto that. I was just thinking about this expression from AJ's poem about the warmth that captures me, and that sort of sense of community, and that you can find it in so many different locations. And so I'm going to do another round robin. I'm really sorry, but I wondered what thoughts that sort of conjured for you. I'm going to start with AJ, if that's okay. What brings that warmth to you? That sort of comfort.
That's a good question. I think the first thing that came to my mind was music. I think, yeah, during like this time period as well, music has been like a really good way for me to connect with myself. Friendship, for sure. I know that that's been touched on a lot, but definitely Black queer friendship specifically as well. And that again, like growth, being able to find different ways to communicate with you, so that have and hold space for each other, but also like taking time for myself, listening to myself, and learning to be more in tune with my body, and feeling like where things are within me, and that's how I can notice the warmth that I'm feeling.
That's beautiful. The idea of noticing how you are and that being part of your warmth, I think is such a divine sort of way of thinking about sort of self-care and self-affirmation. I think self-care has become very much about like face masks and, getting an early night, and there's so much more to it in a sort of cultural, spiritual sense. Campbell, I'm really conscious that you're having to drop off the call, so I'm going to come to you. Where does the warmth capture you?
I think the warmth comes, as AJ said, from friendship, music, taking a delight in others' company. But, we are in this pandemic, which has affected Black and Asian people more than anything else. And so even a basic thing like being alive, to see each day, and giving thanks to the Most High, and to my ancestors who kind of lived so that I could live right now, and wanting to honor them in some way, in kind of living my truth, which I have to say is not as easy as it sounds, because we have forces around us that would prevent us and to seduce us away from our blackness and our queerness as our place of comfort and where we rest. So for me, that's the daily work, to kind of center my blackness and my queerness in a place of joy, and kind of consciously working around that. Oh, we can't hear you now, Hannah.
That was me. Sorry. I've been teaching all day. I should know better. I love this idea of sort of flipping the question on its head, that the warmth is the work in some ways. I think that that's such a helpful way of thinking about how we have to negotiate the various sort of contexts that we exist in. And I was sort of thinking about, as you were talking about that, the joy that we see in some of your film work, and sort of the presence and the energy. That's something that I sort of associate with, and that we often are represented as sort of static, and that's not something we're seeing in this conversation. Technology, energy, words all combined, we're sort of in a moment of sort of space, and that really resonates. And I wonder how you communicate that, staying with you for a second, Campbell, sort of in your work a little bit.
Well, my work connects with the work Paula does, the work AJ does, the work Candice does, because we're all part of the energy that's Black queer creativity. We each kind of riff off each other, even though we might not even be aware of each other, because we all experience certain narratives in similar ways. So when I hear about your work or I see your work, I'm quite excited and rejuvenated by it. And I hope my films do that for some people. I know when I made Stud Life, it was in a space in which I had to create the space in which Stud Life was made. It wasn't a space created for me. I made that space with the people who came with me. And now people said that movie helped them to come out. They saw themselves in it. And I'm always like, whoa, because I was told there wasn't a market for that film. So, we have to think, who are our critics when we create Black queer work? Who understands where we're coming from, and who do we look to for validation for our work? And I would say we need to develop a Black queer critique of Black queer work. And also, we need to build our own canon in the way white cis het men do. And not be afraid of validating ourselves. In a way, that's what they were trying to do in the Harlem Renaissance, when they each spoke about each other's work. They each kind of bigged each other up in kind of in an artistic and creative community. And I would encourage us to do the same, to join forces more than being kind of divided. And I think globally as well, not just in the UK, because we have the technology.
Yeah, I think this sort of really resonates with some of what Candice is doing in curation and other contexts. So I'm going to come over to you, see if you have maybe a response to what Campbell has led.
Yeah, I have to say, I remember watching Stud Life a while ago now, and it was, no word of exaggeration at all, game changer for me, absolute game changer for me. And in terms of not necessarily just on a representational level, thank you. But I'm a strong believer that if you don't see the space that you need to thrive and grow, and you have to create it, whether it's for yourself or for your community, firm believer in that. And I think yourself and another beloved filmmaker of mine, like Cheryl Denier, inspired me to start a film series, a queer film series for Black filmmakers in Berlin called All Fruits Ripe. And that was off the back of not seeing what I thought to be positive, diverse representations of Black queer folks in mainstream cinema. Oftentimes, the premise of the plot is that they have to suffer in their queerness, or that they're stepping into their queerness. And it was very rare that I would see, be it a web series or a film, spaces where Black queer folks could just be Black queer folks, and it's just about the story of their lives. And queerness is almost like a secondary plot point. And so it was really important for me in creating that series, finding really interesting filmmakers and people who work in moving image, to not only provide a platform which they could actually integrate and interact with one another, but actually understand what that means about my own practice and what that means as a curator. And I think the point that you made about Black critique, Black queer critique, is so important as well, because oftentimes when we're reading reviews or dialogues, discourses around Black queer subjects, Black queer work, it's not coming from us. So the nuance is lost. if I'm bold to say that, the nuance is most definitely lost. And oftentimes the sensitivity is not there as well. And I think if you're not a part of, I'm not saying that you have to be a part of a community to critique a certain thing from that community, but it sure does help if the author, if the artist, if the writer is getting across very specific points that come from a very specific experience. So I think creating a space like this talk that we're having now, is a step forward in that. I think for me, uniting youngers and elders is also a really huge, important part, and our duty as well as people to connect with each other as much as we can. And for me as well, in the work that I do, I'm a big lover of archives, and it's important that these works that we create have a long-standing, sustainable place to live as well, so that, you know, should our souls leave this planet, our work stays behind, our words stay behind, and that there's a legacy that's carried forward for another young generation of people to find, work with, and then take leap from and create more beautiful, wonderful things. So thank you for Stud Life. And yeah, thank you for, you know, planting a seed basically so that we can all be here.
Amateur mistake. I'm so sorry. It's because I fiddle, so I'm turning it off so you don't hear me clicking my pen. There's a lot of resonance.
Just fiddle away.
There's a lot of resonance between what's being said and what's kind of happening in universities at the moment about sort of trying to change who is present, whose research, whose lives, who gets to comment. And you were sort of talking about the nuance, and for me, in my work, I exist in almost an entirely het white field, and the nuance doesn't exist. There's got to be direct about it. And then I was sort of thinking about the work that everyone is doing. AJ wrote a brilliant master's thesis while working in American Canadian Studies at the Uni of Nottingham, and I was thinking about sort of Paula's master's work as well as our creative practice, as well as film, and what that means. I sort of wanted to come to Paula and just sort of think about this space and curation and whose voices, because I think that's a really important part of our creativity and our creative spaces, is that it isn't just the work, if you like, it is who is there and who we are. And I wondered sort of where your different elements fit in that.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's easiest for me to think about my master's research, which is ever evolving, and thinking about who is there and whose voices are heard. So my area of interest it's Black British lesbians, and I had initially been considering their relationship with the Black women's movement and how systems of oppression can exist even within a liberatory movement, thinking about how Black women were not pushed, but made to feel maligned within white feminist movements and Black power movements. And so that's how we got OAD, that's how we got the Brixton Black Women's Group, and, you know, these Black women caucuses to speak to the parts that Black men and white women had wanted us to leave at the door. But then also thinking about, even within these caucuses, they were able to malign Black British lesbians by, you know, espousing that your sexuality is too much. It's a luxury issue to talk about such sexuality, these things, who you're sleeping with. And then that at that point, a lot of groups were fostered as a result of, you know, this feeling of, well, if we're not welcome here, then we're going to build something ourselves. Kind of like what Candice said, in terms of, if I can't thrive in this space, I have to create a new one. So that's kind of what I was interested in doing my work around. But I think since kind of going over the scholarship and having to write a number of essays on them, big up Christina Fryer, who's my lecturer, she's amazing. But I think what I kind of have come away from it feeling a bit underwhelmed, because the scholarship kind of presents Black British lesbians as an offshoot of the Black women's movement. And it's really, really hard to find any kind of information that pertains to, let alone like Black British lesbians and queer women, but like Black trans lives. And I think I am now very interested in world building and thinking about how we existed beyond the political sphere. And I think in terms of like the voices and the stories and the histories that we're just simply not seeing, I think that's part of it as well. I think, you know, we have so few queer Black elders that are visible, that are present. You know, if you were to list them, it's like Campbell, Lady Phil, and then it kind of drops off. If you know of, you know, Gail Lewis or Valerie Mason John, like that's great, but the pool becomes very small. And it's also thinking about those everyday
and Topher. There's a Jarman,
okay.
Sorry.
But no, it's true. And like the pool, it becomes very small, and it's hard to think about and conceptualize what life looked like, because it seems that, you know, Black queer communities just suddenly appeared in the 80s. So I think that's really critically important when we're talking about intergenerationality and thinking about how we commune with older Black communities. I think this is important, and just on the base level, understanding what has actually come before us, and making those connections. So that's kind of what my research is hinged on, just because it feels like we're creating and building new things all the time, but actually it's the same thing, but just with a different name, and it wasn't archived, and it wasn't deemed worthy of being archived or documented. So just creating more of those links is what I'm really, really passionate about. I don't think I even answered your question. Don't know what the question was. I just wanted to talk.
You did.
Can I say?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I say one thing before I have to dash? Please. Which is, our culture is about, you know, Black African culture from which we descended is about intergenerational discourse and dialogue, and we're forgetting it by being subsumed in a kind of Eurocentric culture, and we can't. That's what I mean about remembering our past, but also we are brainwashed to think that we didn't exist in the past, because that is set up deliberately to tell us we had no history, which is not just about Black queer people, it's about Black people. So, you know, I can list some names in the UK, like Berto Pasuka, you know, who started Ballet Negre in the 40s, who was an out Black gay man. You know, Patrick Nelson, who was Duncan Grant's lover, out in the 40s, out Black gay man. I think what you're doing, Paula, is incredible with lesbians and bisexual women, because often their lives are more invisibilized, and never mind trans people. So I think that's really important. But we do have a history in the UK, and it's there to be seen if we dig, but we are brainwashed into the assumption, one, that Black culture is more homophobic and transphobic, and that I would dispute that. And then we begin to narrativize ourselves as victims of our own culture, rather than seeking areas in which we are and have always been accepted. So when I speak to my parents, they talk about their lives in the Caribbean, where they knew LGBT people, not just lesbian and gay, but also trans and intersex people who were part of their lives. But do we hear that in dominant mainstream? The narrative we always have is that our families reject us. And I think we have to start beginning to tell different stories around that rejection, which is not universal.
Mm.
So thanks for the work that you do.
No, thank you. And yeah, what you're saying is so, so important. And it's understanding that these histories do exist. And also, like, the work has never been more urgent as well. I think knowing that there are so many elders who have these stories of coming out, socializing, how they fell in love, you know, things that aren't even necessarily deemed political, and the fear that these stories may pass on with them as well. It's never been more crucial, I think, to begin and continue like making this like a priority to collect as much as we can before it's too late, which is very morbid. But yeah, I think that's what's driving me. Sorry.
What a moment to hold space for Campbell.
on that moment of death. I think it's time for me to leave.
Campbell, we are so grateful for you. We are grateful for your time. We are grateful for your work.
I'm so grateful to share the stage with you. Wonderful people. Love you. So sorry I've had to leave. But good luck with the rest. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Speak soon. AJ, I wanted to come to you a little bit about this storytelling element that's been sort of coming up sort of in lots of different contexts. Obviously, you do soundscapes and you write poetry, you write prose beautifully as well. Like, I just sort of wanted to hear your sort of take on this sort of idea of, I guess, intergenerationality, but also just how we tell stories about ourselves. It's a big question, so pick your favorite bit. But yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking it's interesting because the first person that I came out to was an older Black trans man, and like this, I mean, like my coming out has been a series of various things, but that was the first person that I told that I was queer, and I didn't realize how privileged I guess I was to be able to do that. Like I've been thinking about that recently, like a lot more recently, that like to be able to know him and to have been I was able to be in communication with him. Like he helped me through a lot of things, and like yeah, I've been thinking about how like lucky and blessed I've been like to have that. And yeah, generationality that has even come up in like my master's as well, because part of that I was looking at like erasure, and yeah, and how like yeah, obviously all these histories exist, and you know, people's stories have been, I mean, crushed, thrown away, like all of that kind of stuff. But like we can, or we're trying to access it again, even with like archives. So there's that recent archive, Black and Gay Back, on Instagram. I don't know if people have seen it. I'm sure that people have. Yeah, which has been like really cool to see. Especially something about images, something about that too that just sort of really stands out to me. But yeah, in terms of like my work and intergenerationality, I'm thinking mainly about for this, you know, Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, and how people like that inspired me and made me. I saw like made me see myself, and that's sort of how I turned from. I used to create work from a space of pain, I think. And then I was like, there is joy within that. Like, not within the pain necessarily, but there's joy within me. I don't need to keep creating from a place of pain. I don't need to keep dwelling on that there is joy in our existence, and there's evidence of that. And that's something that I try to, anyway, communicate with my work now, especially with my soundscapes. And yeah, I feel like that went in a lot of, my brain was doing its thing, but yeah.
That's the whole point. I love this, your idea of why we create and operate, creating in different zones as well. That it's not that sometimes we need to create from pain, that is part of our expression, but and that can also be part of our journey, but it doesn't need to be our whole journey. And I was reflecting on my recent very privileged experience of existing in an organization made up almost exclusively of Black queer people, and how our sort of love and safety and communication was completely different, because there was an understanding of fluid existence, but also of being true to yourself, being part of your power. And therefore we created things in more imaginative and open-ended ways, because we were thinking in multiplicit ways rather than in one single form of expression. And I think that sort of comes out in what you're saying about, having this coming out experience, but then having to navigate how you produce your own work as you find yourself, like settling in yourself. And I was wondering, sort of, Candice, in terms of sort of art curation, maybe this sort of where our storytelling sits and what we see and what we hear in those kind of edited spaces, if you like. And I was sort of wondering how you felt about that, and where we sit where Queer Black Joy, I suppose, sits in that space.
It seems to be a running topic at the moment. I'm actually writing something about Black artists in response specifically to BLM, and how media specifically responds to Black artists in response to BLM, but in relation to Black queerness and Black queer joy within art spaces, it exists, but the ways in which they're framed, by the time that it greets audiences, maybe audiences who are not so I guess, involved in art spaces, is that you often get a watered down European Western version of what Black queerness looks like. I feel like oftentimes we tend to fall back on practitioners and artists that have an extensive history with art making and art practice, and what that particular experience of Black queerness looks like, which is not necessarily an issue. It's important that we celebrate those works. But I think as a young person who works in the arts, for me, my experiences of Black queer joy isn't directly within art spaces. And somebody who is actually currently working as a curator, I've always had a distrust of the arts. And that may seem a bit contradictory, but for the longest time, I've always tried to live on the periphery of working within an arts organization, just because I know that my existence is either going to become the focal point, and then I'm going to be the face of diversity and representation within that organization without actually any safety, measures put in place for me. Or the work that I bring will always have to come back to the fact that I happen to be Black and queer. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I think what I'm trying to do in my own practice as an artist and as a curator is not just find people who happen to be Black and queer, but understand that their work comes first. And so often I feel like identity kind of precedes what people are actually saying and doing. And it's important to know that just because that you're Black and queer doesn't mean that you're a lovely, kind, warm, inviting person. We see time and time again, if you're active on Twitter or any other social media platform, that arguments happen, disagreements happen, that people often put their foot in it and have to be told a thing or two about themselves. But that's also important on the road to Black queer joyness, that we hold accountability for one another. So I think for me, in terms of art spaces, the best thing you can do as a person who might be interested in the arts, but I didn't go to art school. I should preface, I didn't go to art school. I don't have an art degree. My background is in literature and creative writing. So for me, it's really about where we're putting the works. And as has been mentioned by Campbell, by Paula, by AJ, it's about archiving, where you situate these works, where you find them. We're seeing a lot of people using Instagram as its own archive space. Amazing. we're seeing a lot of people return to writing new, as you know, the sort of media world is sort of collapsing a little bit in and of itself. A lot of writers and thinkers are returning to newsletters. A lot of people are bringing back their old blogs to kind of talk about their practice and the people that they come into contact with. So for me, the focus shouldn't be on the institution. The focus should be on the people making the work and how they're communicating with one another. So decentralizing these organizations is actually probably a better way to find Black queer joy within the art spaces, in my opinion. And I say this as somebody who works in an arts organization, that beyond the walls, beyond the white cube, there's Black queer joy everywhere. And the internet is probably the best place to start right now, given that we're all in a pandemic and we're at home. But also having, as again, talks like these, spaces like these, where you're seeing these people and then you can follow them in their tracks once the talk is over, once these spaces are no longer present.
With everyone's permission, I will drop your Instagram and Twitter handles in the chat on YouTube so everyone can go follow you after the event. And it's kind of funny for me because I completely agree with you about removing the institution from it while acknowledging the irony that I'm sitting here because of an institution. So also we have to sit in that tension. Like this event is only happening as a result of the combined unison of two institutions, one of which is particularly community looking and one that is referred to as the Ivory Tower on the Hill. And that is part of the tension. And how do we hold space? That's actually the center of the work that I do, both as a musical theatre scholar, which is, incredibly white and centered on American capitalistic dreams, and working in Black studies in a space where Black studies hasn't found its sort of roots. Like we have a massive tradition of Black studies in this country, but not in the university. And there's sort of a claim to knowledge that the university doesn't deserve. And how do we reconcile that as a form of violence is something that I have to sit with a lot. So I really appreciate what you were saying. I want to sort of come back, I suppose, to this idea of how we use creativity ourselves, because I think that there is an element of getting into praxis, if you like, use a fancy term, but like sort of we get into the theory of being creative rather than the reality of being a creative. I nearly introduced myself as a failed opera singer as a way into this route. It doesn't change the fact that I still sing. Like I just am not, being, singing Mozart on a stage. I just, perform tunes to myself in the shower, and that's fine. That's still creativity and it still helps me to thrive. So I kind of wanted to come back to that, this sort of, how do our society puts labels and values on our creative identities, and I think we all live in a space where we're expected to brand ourselves as well, and that our identities then are incorporated into our brand, if that makes sense. And so I kind of want to talk a bit about how creativity disrupts your brand. So for example, the idea of me singing show tunes to myself while I cook is kind of disruptive with my idea of, being a lecturer talking about decolonizing musical theatre history. It's a completely different environment. So Paula, how does creativity exist in your life, and how is it disruptive as well as part of what you do?
I was literally trying to think, and the first thing that actually came to mind, but isn't appropriate, is just how my brand is obviously very Black and queer, but if you find me at home, I'll be watching Law and Order SVU. It's not the same, it's not creativity, but just it's very disruptive. So yeah, I've just kind of outed myself there. Anyway, I think
NCIS, I hear you.
Oh my God, Olivia Benson, my girl. Anyway, I think for me, the way that I view creativity, I don't know, because often I don't think I'm a very creative person. I feel like I write and whatever, but like my friends crochet and bake, and you'll never see me do that. No, not for me.
Hello.
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This might be a me problem.
Sort of attempt to sort of pick up from where we are about sort of our disruptions and ways of sort of thinking about how our identities interact. So I'm going to come to AJ while I think Paula is still grappling with the tech at this point. So AJ, how is your creativity disruptive as well as affirmative?
That's a good question. Thinking about it, I think sometimes, I think it's ironic. I sometimes don't see myself or feel like a creative. You know, sometimes I can't force it. Like sometimes you can't force what you're doing, and sometimes you want to create, but it's not that there's nothing there, but you can't access it, or you're not, whether it's like you need to rest or whatever. My creativity being disrupted.
I suppose, in what ways do you find?
I want to think about that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come to Candice, but it's just about sort of, ways in which we don't think of our creative practice, I suppose. And I'll come back to Paula in a minute, but Candice, let's go to you first.
I have my thoughts run like many miles a minute, and I think what I find my creativity is in itself disruptive. I have too many ideas, and I find it hard to filter out what I think is worthy of my time and what I think is worthy of the time of the people that I'm around. So I often struggle with trying to decipher and decide what I want to pursue artistically, and then end up not doing anything because I'm just like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to plan this, I'm trying to go here, I need to get to flight and go here. And then by the time you it comes down to it, it's like I'm just in my room kind of spazzing out, or in my studio trying to put pen to paper, and it's just not happening. So I think for me, I think what AJ kind of briefly mentioned was like finding rest within that. And I totally agree. I'm not a creative person at all, and I'm quite forthright and open about that. I just know that I like to connect with people who are, but maybe don't necessarily have the strength or the confidence within themselves to bring that out. And for me, I feel like part of my job or my duty is to be like, I see something there, I see something brilliant. Who do I know that can, give you the skills and the resources to kind of bring that to life, so that it exists as part of a network of stuff. So for me, it's just like trying to filter out all the noise and try and get myself to focus on one thing, if that's possible. But within a pandemic right now, no better. Just rest yourself, rest your nerves, honestly.
I really feel that, and like I have ADD and dyslexia and dyspraxia, so like nothing in my brain runs smooth. So I was just like, it's always chaos, and it's always just trying to find the way. And actually, listening to what you were saying, and also what AJ, or I think what everyone was saying, is that's actually probably my actual answer. It's not singing in the shower. It's recognizing how I get through the day where my brain has latched onto the car that's just driven past, and I'm wondering what the kid who's on the other side of the wall is doing right now. I think he's punching something, and my brain is doing that while, holding space and having this conversation. And actually that is it's my disruption as well as my praxis, if you like. The being able to be here is actually that manifestation for me. I was thinking about all of us in our different contexts produce things like tangible, whether it's an article or whether it's a piece of work or whether it's a soundscape or a print. And I sort of wondered, like, how does material culture fit into this space where we've talked about archives and we've talked about absences? Do you feel that it is important to make things with some sort of tangibility in the context of our different histories? Or do you think that it's just the natural process that we sort of been told we have to follow? It's a complicated question, but I wonder about this sort of the having something to hold, having something to show someone on your phone, having something that you can go back to and go, look, I did this, and it's part of X. If that's actually part of the conversation we're having about taking up space and acknowledging our past selves as well as us in the moment. I don't know if anyone wants to take that. I don't want to throw it at someone without sort of forewarning.
I could try and answer the question. I think that I think in the culture that we're part of right now, it feels like you need to have something to show. Otherwise, does it exist? And I think that there is something in there. There's something to be said about legacy and passing something on and having something as part of the official record, whether public, whether part of the institutionalized record, or whether part of, it stays with a community archive or something like that. And I think it's kind of what needs to happen is like the differentiation of like the intention. Like, is it in the moment, and is it something that you just want to put out right now because that's what you feel like doing it? Absolutely, that's fine. Is it something that you actually don't want to show anyone, and this is for you, and this is a realization for yourself? You've come to terms with maybe a part of your identity or a part of your practice, and it's something that you want to hold for yourself and keep dear. That is also fine. Is it something that you want to outlive you and to, like I said, become part of a recorded history in some way. I think it's divvying up what your intentions are, because not everything is for community. Not everything that you might want to work on is necessarily for a greater and wider good. And I don't think it should have to be. I think that there should be some things that are spurned from your own, oh my gosh, I need to, there's an image in my head and I need to illustrate it and put it out on paper in some way. And I then, put it in a cupboard and not look at it again. I just needed to get it out. There was an urge, there was a need. And I think that's also fine. So I think the kind of the culture that we're in, and obviously it being a capitalist culture, it always feels like you need to be able to turn your creativity into something that will make you money and something that will return some sort of clout, some sort of financial benefit. It needs to be a productive form of creativity. And yeah, I think what we're all doing and what a lot of Black queer people do, we're refuting that. It's thinking about mutual aid. It's thinking about actually how can we exchange this, and how can what I'm doing, my work and my practice, how can that actually benefit you rather than we want to amass more. So yeah, I just started talking as per usual, but yeah, I think it is intentionality in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think just to chime in on that as well, most definitely it's about your intent, about what it is that you want to produce. And I think in tangent with that, it's also about resources and how creativity or the arts more broadly is funded. Like in the UK, at least, 9 times out of 10, if you want to get money to back whatever project that you want to bring to life, it has to come through ACE. And this one central body that divvies out money to everybody, which I gotta be careful what I say, but for me, it seems a bit ridiculous that we have this one funding body that then sort of has a monopoly on what is deemed worthy of a wide cultural audience and what should remain a quote unquote DIY bedroom project. For me, that's ridiculous. You need to take into account things like classism, place, how different cities within I'm talking the UK context specifically here, how different cities within the UK are funded by a local council, arts council, that, who is prioritized in terms of like art spaces. The South gets prioritized more than the North, for example. So I think it's a matter of what you intend to do with your work, who you intend to talk to and reach. Is it a personal project? Is it a community project? Is it a culture project? And also how you get it funded. And I think what oftentimes for Black queer folks, in the UK and in my experience of working within Germany, tend to be very resourceful, purely because not out of a interest, but out of a need. Oftentimes we can't get the money. Either you're not registered, or you're not a citizen of a certain place, you're a refugee, whatever your status is. That plays a huge role in your ability to actually create and produce something, let alone share it. So I think if we're talking about where Black queer joy is situated in terms of work, who gets to see that work, who gets to make that work, there's so many socio-political factors that affect your ability to even start creating and start making work. We're lucky that a lot of us, write for certain platforms, work for certain organizations, study in certain organizations that oftentimes can give us those resources. And yes, that makes us privileged in one sense. But part of our job here is not just to do our own research for our own benefit, but actually share those resources. So you have things like the Black Free University, for example, which does an incredible job of trying to open up education to all Black folks who are not necessarily with part of the mainstream system. So I think for me, it's leading with how you want your work to be and how you want it to go and how you want it to be shared, but also understanding there are a plethora of mitigating factors that affect people's ability to even start and even understand their own creative lens. And I think the original question was about material. Yeah, I think a lot of funding is for material. It's for material. I only just started working with materials in my own practice. For me, everything I did was text-based. And for that, I just needed a pen and a paper. And honestly, it was the cheapest way that I could sort of make my work and put it out there without having to invest in, a laptop and then having to get Adobe Suite and then having to get all these other things that people might want to use to make their work. So resources and how we fund arts comes into a huge play as to how Black queer people can actually make, share, experiment with their work and their practice.
That resonates so much with me in my context. In, you know, the Arts Council England is very similar to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And I'm not going to be careful about what I say, but you know, I am part of, you know, an intersection of, you know, academic research and teaching staff in the UK that comes to less than 1%, being both of Black heritage, being mixed race, being queer. That takes me into, you know, what they refer to as negligible areas of statistics. But what's more fun about that is that the Arts Council doesn't want to fund us. They want to fund work about us, not by us. And that's one of the big tensions for me in terms of money and funding, like what you were describing. So I tweet a lot about my research. I tweet a lot about my teaching. I want it to be out and open and accessible. That's one of the reasons that I joined the Free Black Uni. It's why I've been on the team, like, because I don't believe in the boundaries of education, like, if I'm being honest about it. And I've had so many messages during the pandemic from other academics telling me to stop putting my intellectual property on Twitter because I should put a price on it. I should publish it. It should belong to me. And I'm like, why are my thoughts about The Lion King? Like, they don't belong to me. Like, I mean, obviously they do, but you know what I mean? Like, why do I have sort of intellectual control over that? And it feeds into this sort of capitalistic idea of exceptionalism, this idea that you are the only one, and what you do is always original. And something I find really important about creativity in the Black queer context is that it's not about being the only one. And I think that that's something that's come out so much in this conversation, that it isn't about exclusivity and exceptionalism and, you know, my random piece of work being elevated above everyone else. It can be about you, and that's completely fine, but it's also about everyone, and the interaction, if you like, that we have in our spaces is individual and community and generational. It's not always all of those things, but there is a through line. And I think that's sort of what Campbell was talking about not losing sight of the fact that it is a journey and a process rather than lots of stops. And yeah, it just really resonated with me in sort of my context. I sort of saw Paula lean forward, so I just don't want to check that when you wanted to come in.
I wanted to chime in on what you're saying, because that's right on the money. And I think that a lot of the stuff that we're doing, I think our purpose should be working to become obsolete. And I think a lot of the pitfalls that Black queer creatives can fall into as well is that because you've been positioned as a hard to reach community, then it's now you being the go-to person. Now your brand kind of is built on, yeah, it's hard being a Black queer person, and you know, we need as much funding and blah blah blah. And obviously all of these truths can exist, but it's when that becomes part of your brand, when that becomes part of how you market yourself. Whereas with the travel guide, for example, I'm hoping to one day for us to not need it, because we can travel safely and don't need to have specific tips and recommendations. I'm hoping with my research that I'm not going to be, I know that there are a few other people in this specific field, maybe like less than 5, but I'm hoping that I will be joined once I myself join it. I'm talking like I'm like a PhD student. I am a master's student, but I will be joined. I'm contributing to a canon, and that more people will be contributing beyond myself. And I think it's really trying to decentralize the individual and resist all of the things that we're conditioned to believe, that we are token, you know, we can be the only one in this space. If you allow or pass on opportunities, then this means that organization will start going to the other person, and that you'll lose out on future financial income. And so I think that's something that we're trying to resist. I definitely, all 4 of us here and a lot of the people that I know, is that the very tempting call to just take up as much space as possible. So yeah, that's just those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree. Really, don't have anything profound to say after that. But there is this issue of sort of the token and the integrated person, all of these dialogues about assimilation, about like attempting to belong to a community on the terms of their performances rather than on who we are. And I really sort of that really sort of sits with me. And I was just sort of thinking sort of in how we express ourselves, and I wanted to come to AJ on this, and sort of how do we balance this? So like our individuality and our souls are really important in this context, but at the same time, the work isn't so much about us, if that makes sense. How do we do both? So it's a massive question, but what do you do to do both, I guess?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, I think a crucial part for me has been, obviously I'm a Black queer person. Whatever I do, like, I don't have to do anything to be a Black queer person, you know what I mean? I don't have to like perform in any particular way to be seen as a Black queer person. And that has like taken off a lot of stress or pressure. Even when Paula was saying about when you're trying to be, or people can try to be the go-to person, that stresses me out. Like the idea of having all of that, like putting all that pressure on yourself or trying to be that, like that stresses me out a lot. So yeah, even when I'm trying to do too much in terms of helping other people, like I need to rest, you know? I need to find that balance. Because it's that saying, you can't give from an empty cup, can you? So like with my work, obviously, it sort of links to the material, what you were saying. I do like having material things. I like having something that I can refer back to, right? I like, even when I'm producing or making my work, seeing it as me just doing something and putting it there that people can engage with whenever they want to. I think that's helped a lot. It's sort of changed the way that I've engaged with social media, and with helping me find the balance between myself and my work. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. I hope it does. But
It does, absolutely. There's a lot of love going on in our chat. It's great. It's really sort of boosting what you are saying. And I kind of wanted to pull out two things as we're sort of coming towards the end. And so I'm just gonna pull together some things. But you said about rest and about you can if you want to. And the emphasis there is both you can if you want to and you can if you want to. It isn't you don't say that expression in one way. So it's not just about empowerment, but it's about choice. And I think that that's often a dialogue that gets left out of these conversations, that in order to thrive, we have to choose and not feel forced into spaces. And I think that's one of the tensions of being sort of a focal point individual in whatever context you're in, the only, or a go-to person. And I've really experienced that coming into my Black Studies role. I went from getting like 80 emails a day to getting 800 emails a day, and that's not even an exaggeration, I can't tell you. But suddenly everyone wanted me to be an expert on all sorts of random things. Like, do I want to comment on women's representation in football? I write articles about musicals. Like what am I going to say? Do you know what I mean? Like I can probably name 4 football teams. Like, what do you want from me? And but that is one of the tensions, I suppose, is that we sit in this weird space where our exceptional reality becomes someone else's opportunity. And that's why I wanted to come back to you can if you want to. And obviously we have to pay our bills and we have to stay healthy. And those are the priorities. And sometimes we have to make choices to do those two things. But outside of that, I hope that you can take away ideas of community, of being loved and held, of being the person you need rather than the person you're expected to be, and to really hold on to that idea of finding your warmth and holding on to it, and also that you can if you want to, but you don't have to. I think that that's a really wonderful way to end. So thank you, AJ, for funneling those thoughts through. I'm going to pass back to Mercer. Thank you so much to everyone for joining this panel, and I will drop all our socials into the YouTube link, into the YouTube chat in a minute.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for chairing this wonderful conversation. Also, thank you very much to our panelists today, Campbell X, Candice, AJ, and Paula. Thank you for your time and for your sharing your experience with us. Just before we say completely goodbye, I just want to mention a couple of events that we have coming up. Next Thursday, 4th of March at 6 p.m. we've got yoga and art. So during this yoga experience, we will also mindfully explore Phoebe Boswell's exhibition, which hopefully will open in May. Watch this space. So we can explore the exhibition via a video with bespoke soundtrack we've commissioned for that. So it's a very special event for us. It's a chance you've got to get a sneak peek of the exhibition before it actually opens. And we've got another event coming on the 11th of March to celebrate International Women's Day. It's called The Art of Oppression, and it's a film screening and a discussion. The discussion will be joined by the director of the film, the artist in the film, and human arts campaigner and activist Zita Holborn. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining, the audience and the panelists and Hannah. See you soon.
No. That's the answer.
Cool.
I was just watching it out the